Letitia James was never one to hesitate with a pen. Attorney General of New York, elected by millions, feared by more. In a city where policy is polished like glass and deals are brokered before sunrise, she had mastered the art of sharp signatures, fast, final, indisputable. But on that day, seated at the head of the mahogany conference table on the 19th floor of her midtown office, with a housing budget worth hundreds of millions lying neatly before her, her hand froze mid-air. And it wasn't the numbers, the clauses, or the press waiting downstairs that did it. It was a voice, young, uninvited, and cutting through protocol like a blade. That clause flips everything. If you sign this, it's your office that gets buried. For a full second, nothing moved. Not the blinds, not the legal pads, not the 5 staffers on payroll to triple-check such moments. Silence didn't descend. It detonated. The voice belonged to Maya Williams, 16 years old, maintenance uniform 2 sizes too big, janitor's badge hanging crooked, and a crumpled sheet of paper in hand that had no business being in that room. She had slipped in behind the cleaning crew, hugging the wall with a mop bucket and a stare too steady for her age. At first, no one looked. Then everyone did. Letitia's eyes lifted first, dark and razor-sharp. Her senior aide, Amy Rosenthal, snapped her neck around so fast her pearl earring caught the light. Across the table, the representative from the contractor firm furrowed his brow, unsure whether to laugh or reach for security. A junior counsel smirked. "Who let the janitor's daughter in here?" he muttered. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't need to explain how she got in. She needed only one sentence to reset the hierarchy of the room. Slowly, deliberately, she walked forward, the sheet of paper trembling just slightly in her grip. Clause 9. Subsection B, she said. It transfers all post-approval liability directly to the Attorney General's office. Any corruption, delays, cost overruns, they all come back to your desk, not theirs. Her tone was calm, clipped, almost clinical. Letitia didn't blink. Her pen lowered. Just a few inches, but enough to shift the balance of the moment. Amy leaned forward, forcing a smile too wide to be real. "That's standard boilerplate," she said, her voice breezy, like someone explaining a typo to a judge. "She's mistaken." But Letitia didn't respond to her aide. Her eyes were locked on the paper Maya held, a printed excerpt highlighted in red, circled with the kind of urgency that legal teams are trained to ignore if it doesn't come with a title. Letitia stood, slowly, each movement weighted. She extended her hand. Maya handed over the sheet without a word. The room didn't breathe. Amy tilted her head but said nothing. The contractor rep began shifting in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. It was supposed to be routine. The document had passed every internal filter, every departmental sign off, but none of them were 16. None of them stood outside the power structures long enough to see what those inside stopped noticing. Letitia's eyes scanned the text, then again, then a third time. Her fingers curled slightly at the edge of the page. The phrasing was too clean, the responsibility too one-sided. Legal language that looked safe until you read it with the eyes of someone not paid to assume good faith. She didn't ask how Maya had found it. She didn't ask why. She simply looked up and said, "Everyone out, except her." Chairs scraped, eyes lingered, but nobody disobeyed. As the door shut behind the last staffer, Letitia remained standing, page in one hand, pen in the other. She looked at Maya not with suspicion, not even curiosity, but with the steel-eyed recognition of someone who just realized they were 2 seconds away from signing a slow-motion detonation. Maya said nothing. She didn't have to. The real question wasn't how the claws got there. The real question was, who wanted it to stay unnoticed? And just like that, the most powerful woman in New York politics wasn't thinking about ribbon cuttings or press conferences anymore. She was thinking about betrayal, because a 16-year-old just made her look at her own desk and wonder who turned it into a trap. Letitia didn't speak for a long while, not out of doubt, but because her mind was already 20 steps ahead, scanning a chessboard she hadn't realized she'd been playing on. Alone now with the teenager who'd dropped a legal grenade on her polished table, she stared at the sheet again, the paper still warm from Maya's palm. "How did you know?" Her voice was even, but not soft. Letitia James didn't do soft. She did controlled detonations. Maya met her gaze, calm in a way that made the room feel colder than it was. Because no one else reads every line. They trust each other. I don't. Her answer wasn't rebellious. It was matter-of-fact, like a weather report delivered from inside a hurricane. She slid the crumpled document forward with the precision of someone setting down evidence, not a plea. "It sounds legal." That's the trick. It's written to pass through your radar, but it distorts accountability. If the contractor defaults or hides cost overruns, your office owns the collapse, and there's no reciprocal clause, no joint liability, just you. Letitia took the paper, her fingers tightening slightly. She read it slowly, the way a surgeon inspects a scalpel with dried blood on the edge. Her brow furrowed at line 5, exclusive indemnification under Section 9B. The wording was slick, familiar, almost charming, like a con man in a tailored suit. "This wasn't in the draft I reviewed 3 days ago," she said quietly, more to herself than to Maya. Maya didn't blink. It was in the printer in the tech room, marked Final Approval AG. "You were scheduled to sign it this morning." For someone who'd been wiping baseboards less than 12 hours ago, Maya spoke like someone who had just filleted a legislative landmine. Letitia didn't thank her. She didn't pat her head. She stood. And with that motion, something fundamental shifted in the air, because when Letitia James stands, people tend to move. She walked to the door, opened it with a force that silenced the hallway, and spoke with the crispness of a legal order. "Amy. Legal. Now." It wasn't a request. It was a signal. Inside 15 minutes, a table that once served muffins and mutual backpats now became the site of a forensic review. No coffee, no smiles. No more pretending this was procedural. Let's pause here and acknowledge the comedy. A 16-year-old had managed to do what a multi-million-dollar advisory board could not spot: the loophole buried like a worm in the apple of Albany bureaucracy. And not just any loophole, but the kind designed to detonate only after the press conference, after the ribbon cutting, after the cameras stopped rolling and the lawsuits began piling up like unpaid parking tickets. This clause, this dainty little devil in subsection B, was a masterclass in political treachery, crafted with just enough ambiguity to lull even seasoned professionals into a false sense of security. It was what lawyers call clean poison. So why didn't anyone see it? Because this is how real sabotage works in American politics. Not with screaming or scandals, but with signatures. With a pen in one hand and trust in the other. And Amy Rosenthal Letitia's trusted aide, the woman who'd managed policy flow like a maestro conducting strings, was sitting too still, her face too flat. When she entered the room again, she offered the kind of smile that Washington interns practice in the mirror. Polished. Safe. A fad 2 microns thick. "You called?" she asked, sliding into her seat like nothing had happened. Letitia didn't answer. She laid the paper down, flat between them. Her tone didn't rise. It sliced. This clause wasn't in the version I reviewed. And here the show began. Amy blinked, then tilted her head. That rehearsed blend of feigned surprise and vague dismissal. That language came from our third-party compliance team. It's standard across public-private initiatives. A pause. You've signed versions like this before. The last sentence hung in the air like an insult disguised as a reminder. Letitia didn't bite. Instead, she glanced sideways at Maya, still standing in the corner. The janitor's daughter. The one person in the room not being paid to miss what mattered. Letitia turned back to her team. I want every draft of this contract pulled. Metadata included. I want to see edit histories, access logs, IP timestamps. If this clause moved itself in here, I want to know which ghost wrote it. No one spoke. No one laughed. Even the contractor rep looked like he wanted to crawl under the conference table. It was no longer a policy review. It was a hunt. There's something profoundly embarrassing about being outmaneuvered by a teenager with a copy of Microsoft Word and a sense of civic duty. It's worse when you realize your own team handed her the map. And as Letitia James narrowed her eyes at the clause again, a single question burned beneath the surface of every breath in that room. Who the hell wanted her to sign it so badly, and what would they have gained when she did? Because this wasn't just a bureaucratic hiccup. This was a setup. And as the gears of internal review began to grind awake, Letitia wasn't thinking about the cameras or the donors or even the press releases carefully scheduled for the following week. She was thinking about betrayal and about what kind of person smiles while handing you the pen meant to ruin you. The irony? That morning, the only reason she hadn't already signed was because a teenager had stopped mopping the floor long enough to mop the floor with everyone else's job. And as her legal team scrambled and Amy smiled her way into dangerous territory, Letitia knew exactly what needed to come next. Find out who else had touched that contract and who was betting she'd never read between the lines. The truth didn't arrive on angel wings. It rolled off a dusty office printer at 9:17 p.m. with a barely audible click and the faint smell of overheated toner. On the 24th floor of the New York Attorney General's building, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look guilty, a maintenance cart squeaked past a room no intern had any business printing from that late, let alone leaving their paperwork unclaimed. Maya Williams wasn't scheduled to clean that section, but fate, it seems, doesn't check rosters. She paused. Not from curiosity, but from a sense that something wasn't sitting right. The document in the tray was thick stapled once at the top left with a bold red header screaming, Confidential Ag Office. She read the title. Final Budget Authorization. Phase 3, Housing Initiative. And that was when her pulse did the thing it always did when something important tried too hard to look boring. See, most kids her age scroll TikTok. Maya scans policy drafts for rhetorical sleight of hand. She watches hearings the way others watch boxing, and her favorite clip isn't a pop star, it's Letitia James methodically cornering Trump Organization lawyers on national television. It wasn't curiosity. It was instinct. She grabbed the document, wedged it under her rag, and rolled the card away like any other Tuesday night. Her mother Denise didn't see. But if she had, she probably would have just said what every overworked mom says when they smell trouble. Don't touch what doesn't belong to you, baby. And Maya would have nodded, and then, exactly as she did, ignored it. Downstairs, in a janitor's closet with a jammed copier and a box of expired toner, she made her move. Every page, one by one. She didn't understand all the terms. She was a lawyer. but she was something arguably more dangerous. A kid with time, pattern recognition, and no incentive to play dumb. She took the copies home, didn't eat dinner, didn't check her phone. At 2:41 a.m., she found it. Clause 9, subsection B, a tiny collection of words so boring, so harmless, it almost worked. The exclusive indemnity clause. 3 lines that took a sledgehammer to the concept of shared accountability. The kind of clause that makes contractors billionaires and public offices punching bags. If anything went wrong, delays, corruption, mismanagement, it wouldn't be the developers facing subpoenas. It would be Letitia James, her office, her name, her career. They wrote this like it's standard, Maya whispered, highlighter in hand. But this is a loaded gun. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Not after watching the news cycle for years, watching officials get eaten alive over scandals they never even touched. She remembered the state controller back in 2021 signed off on a procurement deal he didn't even negotiate. And 3 months later, he was testifying in front of a committee chaired by people who could barely spell audit. It wasn't just about fairness. It was about how power gets handed a trap, and no one checks under the hood because someone in a suit said, "It's fine." That was the magic of bureaucracy. It launders liability in plain sight. And it was happening again right here, right now, with a clause so smooth it could have sold handcuffs at a wedding. So Maya did what no one else had. She printed that page twice. One for the record, one for confrontation. She circled the clause in red, not because she thought someone would listen, but because she needed to see it bleed. Then she folded it down the middle, tucked it into the inner pocket of her hoodie, and sat in the dark for another hour, staring at the ceiling, wondering whether being right would matter once the room started pretending she didn't exist. What makes this moment particularly grotesque isn't that the clause got slipped in. No, that happens. What makes it obscene is that someone assumed no one would notice. That Letitia James Harvard-trained, battle-tested, media-calibrated would walk into her office, smile for the cameras, sign the dotted line, and get chewed alive 6 months later when a cement deal went sideways and the contractor was golfing in Aruba. And Amy? She'd just shake her head and call it a tragedy. Bureaucratic miscommunication happens all the time. The sick joke here is that all of this, every fiber of this trap, was designed to look legitimate. It had headers, it had legalese, it had enough buzzwords to numb a law student into a coma. Public-private framework alignment. Accountability, integration architecture. It even had bullet points because nothing says "trust me" like Helvetica and subclauses. But buried beneath all that faux transparency was a bomb wired straight to the public trust. And Maya? She didn't just find the wire. She yanked it in public. That morning, as she tucked the document into her hoodie, she made one decision. She wouldn't let someone powerful make a mistake and call it fate. If Letitia James was going to sign her name to a career-ending disaster, it wouldn't be because no one said anything. It would be because she ignored the only person in the building who bothered to read what everyone else had already filed under taken care of. Which brings us back to the present. Letitia had just shut the conference room door behind the last staffer, Maya still standing in the center like the world's most unlikely whistleblower. One held a pen. One held the truth. And as the legal team reassembled around the circular table with smiles a little too stretched and eyes a little too still, only one question truly mattered now. How exactly had that clause made it to the final draft, and who signed off on letting it pass unnoticed? The real investigation hadn't begun, but the fuse was lit. The room hadn't cooled down. It had frozen over. Gone were the polite chuckles, the performative optimism about public-private partnerships, the neutral hand gestures people use to look non-liable. What remained in the glass and chrome war room of New York's top prosecutor was the smell of political blood and the distinct rustle of someone's career slipping off the edge of a very tall building. Letitia James didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her authority didn't come from volume. It came from the silence that followed when she asked questions like landmines. "Who authorized this clause?" she said, tapping the screen with a single finger like a judge pointing at an exhibit marked Exhibit A, Welcome to Hell. The image on the wall was unmistakable, the very clause Maya had flagged, blown up like a wanted poster. Clause 9. Subsection B, the bureaucratic equivalent of handing someone a cigar box full of venom and saying, "It's decorative." Amy Rosenthal, senior aide, gatekeeper of agendas, and unofficial curator of all things Letitia adjacent, kept her face perfectly smooth, as if Botox had filed for whistleblower protection. "That came from the final review batch," she said. Voice level, gaze unbothered. "It was recommended by the external compliance team." Ah, yes, the old external team excuse. The Swiss Army knife of beltway deflection, vague enough to avoid names, firm enough to suggest inevitability. Letitia didn't blink. "I didn't ask about their recommendation. I asked who approved it in this office." She paused for half a beat, just long enough to force the air out of the room. One of the legal advisors coughed, a reflex you only see in depositions or tax fraud hearings. "That clause was on the version I cleared," he stammered. Another piped up, visibly pale. "I don't recall seeing that language at all, not even in redline." Letitia turned to Maya, who stood in the corner like a human exclamation mark no one had invited, but everyone now regretted ignoring. "Where exactly did you find this?" The girl didn't hesitate. "Printer 15, outside the server closet. In any other context, that would have been a throwaway detail. Here, it was a breadcrumb dipped in kerosene, because Printer 15 wasn't a common printer. It was the printer reserved for high-level document staging accessed only by upper management and IT clearance holders. And now everyone in the room was mentally rewriting their security logs. Letitia's hand hovered over the mouse, then clicked. One screen vanished. Another appeared. Audit trail, user access. She typed in a few keys. The room leaned forward. Then the name popped up, clean, direct, and damning. E. Rosenthal, admin. Ima's face didn't crumble. That would have implied guilt. No, her face stiffened. Which was worse. It was the face of someone who knew exactly what they were seeing, and also knew there was no plausible way to lie out of it without hiring 3 different PR firms and a squirrel with a hard drive. Letitia stared at her, flat and quiet. "Is there a reason your admin credentials were used to push a clause that no one here admits reviewing?" That was the moment Amy might be spun a story. A rogue intern, an old template, a ghost in the machine. But she didn't. And that silence? That was the real confession. Because in politics, you don't need to hear someone say, "I did it." You just need to watch them run out of other people to blame. Now, let's talk about the absurdity here, because it deserves its own round of applause. You've got an aide to the Attorney General of New York, someone whose job is literally to screen this kind of liability, sneakily inserting a ticking time bomb into a budget document so dry it could sand a bowling alley. And her defense? A shrug and a subcontractor. This is the kind of behavior that gets spun as miscommunication in the Times, but in reality, it's corruption's younger, dumber cousin. Strategic incompetence. The kind where someone deliberately does something dumb because the fallout always hits someone else. Unless, of course, a teenager with a photocopier and a spine walks in and flips the table. Letitia didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She leaned back slightly and said, "You'll need to explain this. Not to me. To the Inspector General. Effective immediately." The legal staff collectively swallowed. Amy opened her mouth, but Letitia cut her off with a glance so sharp it could have sheared steel. "Don't. You've said enough." The room stayed deathly still, because in that moment, everyone saw the shift. Letitia wasn't just protecting her office anymore. She was about to investigate it. And if the clause was just the opening act, the name on that log was the overture to something far darker. Because someone had tried to set Letitia up to fail with precision, with access, and with the assumption that she'd be too busy to notice. But they didn't count on Maya, and they certainly didn't count on Letitia noticing where the fingerprints really led. What came next wouldn't be a meeting, it'd be a reckoning. The click of the mouse was barely audible, but the impact landed like a gavel. On screen, 3 documents appeared, each a separate project, each supposedly vetted, clean, routine. A public hospital expansion in Queens, a mental health grant program in Buffalo, and a $500 million urban development contract downtown that had been paraded in the media as a flagship of Letitia James's fiscal stewardship. But now, lined up side by side like suspects in a holding cell, the similarities weren't just uncanny. They were insulting. Letitia leaned in. "Clause 9, she said flatly. "Again, and again, and again." Maya stepped closer, highlighting passages like a prosecutor laying out motive and method. Identical phrasing. Same structure, different projects, same trap. The language wasn't duplicated by mistake. It was replicated with intention because when you want someone to fall into a hole, you don't dig it once. You map out an entire minefield and wait for them to walk it in heels. Amy, still inexplicably seated, like she hadn't just been caught red-credentialed, offered up the kind of excuse that would have made Machiavelli blush. "We outsource legal compliance. It's standard in high-volume cycles." Maybe their language didn't get fully reconciled. Letitia didn't even let her finish the thought. "And you outsourced a clause that pins sole legal responsibility on my office? Without review? Without cross-check? Without a damn phone call?" The last word cracked through the room like a backhand. This wasn't negligence. This was outsourcing culpability while insulating intent. It was the kind of bureaucratic alchemy where things just appear phrased like policy, formatted like ethics, but engineered to collapse exactly when the cameras go dark and the subpoenas light up. Letitia turned to her team. "Check the metadata." Within seconds, the analysis told a story clearer than any press conference. All 3 contracts had been sent from the same internal email contracts, iagcomplianceforward.net. Not a government domain, a forward address, a ghost route, the legal equivalent of a burner phone wrapped in a PowerPoint. It didn't take a genius to see what was happening. It took a girl with a highlighter and no job title. She turned to Maya. "You said it wasn't random." Maya nodded. "It's a model. Like a macro. Someone designed it to be injected late after the drafts, after the red lines. It's legal sabotage, but polite. And there it was. The real scandal in American governance isn't the screaming. It's the spreadsheets. Because bad faith doesn't enter through the front door. It gets airmailed as a PDF and marked confidential final." Letitia folded her arms. "I want every contract bearing my signature since 2019 pulled, audited, and checked against this structure. Tonight." Her legal team froze. One lawyer blinked. "That could take weeks," Letitia snapped. "Then cancel your weekend." And here's the part where you laugh, because this is how politics works in America's upper echelons. A 16-year-old finds the flaw, and a room full of Harvard graduates spend the next week pretending they were just about to notice. The documents were poison pills inserted with surgical consistency and designed to survive exactly one thing: scrutiny. Amy, still trying to feign composure, made a final play. These external partners have been used before, across multiple administrations. This process wasn't mine alone. Oh, how noble the last-minute appeal to tradition. When caught gutting the hull of a ship, blame the blueprint. Classic. But Letitia had already seen enough. Her expression didn't change, but the shift was seismic. She wasn't just looking at bad process anymore. She was looking at a pattern, a deliberate design, a breach of trust engineered to look like paperwork. "This isn't just about 3 clauses," she said. "It's about who benefited if I went down in flames. Because that's the unspoken truth. Someone built a liability funnel, and the nozzle pointed straight at Letitia James. The PR fallout, the ethics review, the budget freeze, it would all land on her. Meanwhile, the contractors would skate, the compliance firms would invoice, and Amy? She'd walk away with a LinkedIn post about navigating complex transitions under pressure. Not this time. And as Letitia stared at those contracts, her name, her signature, her political life almost gift-wrapped for detonation, she knew this wasn't about one clause. It was a system. Someone had practiced this, and if they'd done it once, they'd do it again. But now, the pattern was exposed, and someone was about to regret assuming the Attorney General didn't read the fine print. The digital forensic report arrived on Letitia's desk not with fanfare, but with the quiet dread of truth. A simple login timestamp: 2:14 a.m. The user, E. Rosenthal, admin. The activity, full access to the state's high-level contract server, followed by a single outbound email containing the corrupted Phase 3 housing document. The recipient? An anonymized domain neither state-approved nor on any list of government-compliant vendors. Just a jumble of characters behind a wall of encryption, registered offshore and routed through a commercial anonymity filter. A digital dead end, unless you already knew who you were sending it to. Letitia stood, not in a rage, but with a kind of surgical clarity that always preceded a career-altering incision. You sent state-authorized materials outside the government network. Who exactly were you working for? Her voice was low and even, the kind of tone usually reserved for indictments or divorce proceedings. Amy blinked, finally forced to look up from her trembling hands, still trying to keep her professional mask glued in place. "It was protocol," she said, unconvincing even to herself. "We exchange drafts for compliance all the time. I don't memorize every address." Letitia didn't flinch. "Then, let me refresh your memory. That address belongs to Yarrow Bain LLC, the contractor you vetted, pitched, and personally escorted into this office. The man sitting outside this room right now, waiting for my signature, received a copy of this budget authorization before I did." The sentence hung in the air like a noose waiting for gravity. Silence followed, but it wasn't peace. It was combustion deferred. Maya, standing off to the side, locked eyes with Amy. But this time, there was no fire in the teenager's stare. Just a quiet acknowledgement, not of power but of exposure. Because once you see the trick, the magic's gone. And once you see the motive, the apology means nothing. Maya knew now what kind of system she'd wandered into, one where policy was sculpted not by lawmakers, but by staffers with midnight logins and plausible deniability. Letitia exhaled slowly. You didn't just alter a clause, she said. You made sure the people with the most to gain from that clause saw it before I did. You leaked a live contract to a bidder. That's not negligence, that's collusion. Her voice sharpened. And don't tell me it's a misunderstanding. I've seen misunderstandings. They don't come with timestamps, encryption, and offshore IPs. Still, Amy didn't confess. She didn't crumble. She did what people like her are trained to do. She absorbed, recalibrated, and waited for the next procedural loophole to crawl through. You'll need to file an internal review, she said stiffly. We can request third-party arbitration. Letitia cut her off with a hand gesture that froze the air. You don't get to talk about process after bypassing every single one. The room was silent again, save for the buzz of the wall-mounted monitor still displaying the access log. And in that quiet, something shifted, not just in the dynamics of the office, but in the very definition of trust. Letitia wasn't angry anymore. She was clinical. This wasn't a betrayal between colleagues. This was a surgical diagram of institutional rot, a betrayal not of a person, but of the public. We'll trace every login, every file, every access, Letitia said. If there's a chain, well, follow it. And if it leads to that boardroom outside, so be it. She turned to her chief IT officer. Archive everything. No deletions, no exceptions. The man nodded, already tapping commands on his tablet. Maya stepped forward slightly, voice steady but soft. Do you want me to leave the room? Letitia looked at her and shook her head. You're the only reason this office is still standing upright. You stay. And as the door reopened not to let someone in, but to usher someone out, the meaning of the moment crystallized. This wasn't just about a budget. It was about access, about who gets to touch the buttons that shape the state. Amy walked out stiffly, dignity cracked but not yet surrendered. But the silence she left behind was louder than any protest. Because when the people meant to guard the gates are the ones selling the keys, it's not just the walls that fall. It's the whole idea of a republic. And somewhere in that silence, a question was forming, quiet, dangerous, inevitable. How many more contracts had been signed under the same shadow? The hallway leading to the fourth-floor IT archive was meant for dramatic exits, but then again, neither was public service. Yet, there she was, Amy Rosenthal, former senior advisor, walking fast but not frantic, holding a labeled USB drive like it was a passport out of purgatory. Contract V6 Final, the tag read handwritten, underlined, and damning. To the untrained eye, she might have looked like just another staffer running a tech errand. But Maya saw the shift in body language. Shoulders stiff, stride calculated, eyes too focused for a casual break. It wasn't escape, it was cover. Maya didn't hesitate. She went straight to security, bypassing protocol the way only someone who hadn't yet been taught to fear it could. Letitia didn't ask questions. She acted. Lock down floor 4. I want visual feed, real time. The command dropped without fanfare, triggering a silent network of actions that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with survival. For once, bureaucracy moved fast because it knew it was bleeding. Down in the server room, the air was thick with cold circuitry and desperation. Amy, hunched over a terminal, fingers trembling over the delete command, had already bypassed the surface gate. She was in deep accessing back-end drives, targeting logs and caches that stored every edit, every metadata trail, every damn keystroke of the altered documents. What she didn't know was that the room was now under full lockdown, and her credentials had just expired mid-session. The door clicked open. Letitia entered, flanked by two security officers, but needing neither. She said nothing at first, just stood there, watching Amy attempt to act surprised. The air didn't crackle, it condensed, and when Amy finally broke the silence, her voice came with that same sanctimonious edge that once made her a trusted aide. "I'm not going to let that girl ruin what I spent 4 years building." Letitia's reply came without pause, without inflection, and without mercy. "You didn't build anything. You just got away with things because I was busy trusting you." The words landed like a mirror. Not a punch, not a scream, just reflection. Cold, accurate, unforgiving. Amy looked around the room, searching for allies in a space designed only for machines. There was none. No process left to manipulate. No chain of command to climb. Only surveillance, silence, and a boss who now saw everything she used to miss. "I was fixing a redundancy issue in the backups." Amy tried, gesturing vaguely at the command screen, still active. Some of these files were misaligned out of spec. I was standardizing. Letitia took a step forward. "That USB in your pocket? You going to standardize that too?" Her tone was surgical. "Or were you planning to hand it off to the same people who got the last draft before me?" There it was. The second wound, and this time Amy bled. "I thought I was helping you," she murmured, eyes flickering like a broken screen. "I was protecting the project. I was making it viable." "No," Letitia replied. "You were making yourself indispensable. That's not loyalty, that's extortion with a slower clock." The IT staff remained silent, watching from a corner as witnesses to a different kind of trial one, where evidence stared back in real time from a flickering terminal screen. Maya stood just outside the doorframe, frozen but not afraid. This wasn't fear, it was recognition. She saw, in real time, how power doesn't collapse. It just rewrites its own log files unless someone pulls the plug. Letitia turned to the head of security. "I want every file recovered, every shadow copy, every off-site clone. This isn't about one project. It's about everything touched by her login credentials since the day she walked into this office." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Truth doesn't yell, it just echoes. And as Amy was quietly escorted out, clinging to her last semblance of control, one question clawed its way into the silence. If 4 years of fraud sat undetected under Letitia's watch, who else had been watching her watch it happen? The room wasn't built for this kind of meeting. Too many suits, too few answers. But Letitia made do, pulling together a circle tight enough to squeeze out plausible deniability. The internal inspector, the chief legal officer, the head of IT, and, for the first time, Maya Williams, no longer just the girl with the mop, but now seated with a nameplate and a voice. No one addressed her as that kid anymore. She'd become the firewall between Letitia James and a multi-million-dollar political implosion. And while most of the room carried law degrees and lanyards, she alone carried proof. Not ideology, not assumption proof. Recovered data confirmed what Letitia suspected, but hadn't wanted to say aloud. The sabotage had a signature, and it spelled Amy. Every file she'd altered, every clause she'd rewritten, every approval she'd faked, it was all there. Logged, time-stamped, matched perfectly to her credentials. But the real twist didn't come from what was linked to her. It came from what wasn't. 3 previous projects, each bearing what appeared to be Letitia's signature, were traced back to forged documents, manipulated using a high-resolution scan of her handwriting, pasted into final drafts with surgical precision. The digital forensics team found the composite layers intact, sloppy only in their arrogance. The documents looked real, read real, got processed as real, but they were political fishing lures designed to fail downstream after approval. Maya, flipping through the file stack, raised a finger. These metadata strings. They're generated at 2:27 a.m. outside standard access windows. No authorized logins at that time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence that followed did all the work. Letitia turned to the IT director. Her voice was flat but precise. I want the source IP traced. I want to know if that ghost access came from offshore, or if someone in this building handed them the keys. And just like that, the metaphorical lock clicked, and one of the mid-level legal advisors flinched. Not visibly, not enough to trigger alarm bells in an MSNBC newsroom, but enough for a woman like Letitia, whose whole career had been about reading liars with expensive diction. From across the table, Maya caught the twitch too. It wasn't vindication. It was clarity, like spotting the last missing screw before a bridge collapses. She didn't speak, but Letitia saw her shift in her seat, ever so slightly toward that advisor. Two women, one elected, one invisible, now aligned in instinct. The legal advisor tried to pivot, playing procedural hardball. If this access came through a legacy port, the system might register it as ghost even if the credentials were internal. But Letitia cut him off. Legacy ports don't generate cross-project metadata. That's not a loophole. That's a backdoor. And there it was. The temperature in the room dropped. The man's breath stuttered. The forensic officer glanced sideways. Something wasn't just rotten, it was still breathing. Someone inside the system had been not just complicit, but active, maintaining access channels, faking approval chains, and worst of all, doing it beneath Letitia's nose. Yet what made the moment truly savage wasn't just the breach. It was the realization that this had been the plan all along. This wasn't a one-off betrayal. This was version control warfare. Build fake approvals, embed one-time use signatures, wait for a slip-up, then detonate accountability where it hurts most, the public servant who actually shows up to work. Letitia stood slowly. Her voice carried no tremor. This isn't about one bad apple. This is about the orchard. And if any of you had the courage to report what you suspected months ago, we wouldn't be here cleaning up a mess you helped create. Nobody answered. The silence was consent. And while the IT team pulled the root logs and Maya scanned for pattern redundancies, Letitia made her next move, not to the press, not yet, but deeper inward. Because the trap hadn't been sprung, it had been mapped, and the one who designed it was still somewhere in the blueprint. The blinds were drawn, not for secrecy, but for discipline. Letitia didn't need an audience, nor a headline. She needed a reckoning. Across from her, seated without the posture of innocence but not yet in the posture of surrender, was Amy Rosenthal. For years, she'd been the invisible architecture behind meetings, logistics, procedural maneuvers, and assets so competent that suspicion felt impolite. Now, she was simply a woman confronted with the ruins of her own duplicity. On the table sat 3 folders, unassuming in color but radioactive in content. One carried printouts of encrypted emails between Amy and executives from a contractor previously red-flagged by the state auditor. Another held financial records linking her to 2 former political strategists who, for a time, had operated behind the scenes as unofficial issue advisors until they were caught laundering untraceable donations into lobbying arms disguised as housing NGOs. The third folder contained the final blow, a forensic breakdown of the fabricated legal clauses, their revision history traced directly to her work terminal with timestamps, IP trails, and metadata strings that no PR statement could scrub clean. Letitia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You didn't betray me," she said, sliding the files forward with surgical clarity. "You betrayed the system. You compromised the office you swore to serve, and you did it under my name, banking on the fact that I trusted you too much to notice." Her tone was neither scolding nor emotional. It was cold enough to pass audit. Amy didn't flinch, but her eyes narrowed, calculation flickering in the corners. She leaned forward slightly, not with remorse, but with a warning. "And you think you'll hold on to this office much longer once I speak up?" Her voice was calm, not desperate. She'd rehearsed this moment in her mind, maybe even convinced herself she was the protagonist. "You think you'll walk away clean from this, with me burned and you untouched?" Letitia didn't blink. "If your voice is built on deception, you'll silence it with evidence," she said. "You want to go public? Do it. But remember, you don't have the truth. You have a narrative built on forged files and hidden accounts. I have every log, every timestamp, every back-end trace you thought you deleted." For a second, nothing moved. Then Letitia added, "You think the public hates corruption, but they hate cowards more, and a coward doesn't confess. She threatens." Amy finally looked away, just a glance, but enough to show she was re-evaluating her odds. Letitia had seen this moment before, not in this room, but in courtrooms, campaign floors, deposition booths everywhere. Someone backed into a corner had to decide whether to bluff or beg. The silence now wasn't awkward. It was strategic. Each woman weighed not just what had happened, but what came next. Amy had wires to cut, allegiances to burn, maybe a leak or two lined up in her inbox. But Letitia had the system, and this time she was using it like a scalpel. As Letitia stood, she didn't dismiss the room. She declared its future. "This doesn't end in here," she said. "This goes where it should have gone from the start, under oath, under light, under record." And across the street, the first subpoenas were already being drafted. The cameras were already rolling when Letitia stepped up to the podium. No flag-studded backdrop, no chorus of staffers rehearsing optics, just the polished marble of the main lobby, a podium mic, and one woman who knew exactly what she was about to set in motion. Her voice was steady and sharper than any press release. "We are opening a formal internal investigation into the unauthorized manipulation of state financial documents, actions which may constitute criminal fraud under New York statute." She didn't hedge. She didn't shift blame. She didn't wait for the press to fill in the blanks. She handed them the story with the gloves already off. No spinning, no alleged this or possible that. Just the facts, nailed to the floor like the pillars behind her. And as the press scribbled and clicked and live-streamed the moment into every pocket of the political East Coast, one name cut through the buzz with surgical precision: Maya. Letitia said it cleanly. No build-up, no emotional swelling. A young woman in this office found what others missed or ignored. She was not a consultant, not a chief of staff, not even part of the policy board, but she did what none of them did. She read, she questioned, she spoke up. Maya stood far from the cameras, pressed against the edge of the hallway like a shadow just beyond the perimeter of power. But now, everyone turned. Her name wasn't a footnote. It was the story. Not because she was extraordinary, but because she chose not to be complacent. As the reporters packed up and aides started murmuring over follow-ups and off-the-record nudges, Maya remained where she was, next to the same hallway where, weeks ago, she had stood invisible, clutching a mop handle and watching people pass without even registering her. She wasn't at the mic, but she didn't need to be. Letitia noticed her on the way out. She stopped not for show, not for applause, but for clarity. She looked Maya in the eye and said, "Never think your voice doesn't matter. Today you saved this system from a signature that would have destroyed it." Maya took a breath, then asked, barely above a whisper, "And what if someday I'm the one holding the pen?" Letitia smiled. Not wide, not ceremonial, just enough to signal understanding. "Then make sure you never trust anyone completely," she said. "Not even yourself." And with that, Letitia walked past, back into the business of rebuilding a structure still scorched at the edges. The lobby emptied, but Maya stayed a little longer. Not because she had to, but because she now understood what it meant to be the last one left when the room clears out, and why that's the moment the real work begins.